So thank you so much for being here today once again. I am so grateful for the opportunity to present at the EPA Region 9 Tribal Conference. I think this is an excellent venue always, every year. We participated in previous years, and this year I especially appreciate the organizers for moving everything online. I know it's a huge challenge. It's a very different way of offering content to our stakeholders. And I know we all enjoy the in-person interaction so much. I think that's the highlight of all of these conferences, where we can actually meet people and interact with them. But, you know, this time, these are unusual times. And so I'm so glad we're doing this online. I'm sure I'm thankful that you're all watching it virtually rather than the in-person. And hopefully, by next year, we'll be able to come back to the regular format of the in-person. But for some people, I think the online version would still work at any time. So I hope we have that flexibility. So this presentation is somewhat related to that. You know, how do you be resilient? How do you prepare for emergencies, and how do you adapt? So I think this is kind of an appropriate topic for these times, these very unusual times. So let's begin. So I would like to start with with the meanings of some of these words. I see people are still joining. Melissa, I hope you can hear me correctly. Can you just give me? Oh, great, thank you. So you know, just starting with the basics about these meanings. I know these are not unique words to this emergency situation. These are general words that we use in a human context. So what do these words mean? Sometimes we don't even think about it, right? So I thought, let me just start with that. And I looked up the meanings of these words, and you'll see that there's really a lot of overlap. There's a lot of similarities. So adaptation is the characteristic of a plant or an animal, an organism, that makes it able to adjust to conditions. Resilience is also the same, but quickly, that is the key, quickly adjust and return to the normal state. An emergency is something unexpected, where you need to adapt quickly. So you see how they are really related, and there's a lot of overlap between these concepts, but they're not the same, right? And so the question arises, how is resiliency different from emergency preparedness and adaptation? And you know, humans as a species, we are remarkably adaptable, right? We can adapt to the most unexpected and harsh situations sometimes. But having a plan helps us further. So that is what these resiliency planning and emergency preparedness are about. So emergency preparedness is about having a plan in place for communities and for individuals to respond when a disaster and emergency happens. But resiliency planning goes a little further. It really goes beyond traditional emergency preparedness, and it explores a little bit into the underlying causes of why that emergent situation happened in the first place. It also looks at vulnerabilities, you know, which are the people that are most hard hit. Who are the most vulnerable sections of the population? So resiliency, because when you think of a community, you know, the weakest link is the most vulnerable people in the community, right? And in most of our communities, it is the elderly, the infirm, some people who are sick, and the little ones, the little children, right? So resiliency planning takes all of that into account, and that is why it is different. So here's a diagrammatic representation of that, of what I was just talking about, resiliency planning, and how it links you know, different aspects in the community. It links together the environment. It links together social and economic sectors. And we try to holistically improve the ability of an entire community to adapt to the changing conditions. So I think it's a beautiful concept, and there's so much scope for work in this area. And that's why I thought this is a great time to be talking about resiliency, because of what we are all going through right now, correct? And what can we do differently so we learn from this situation, if it ever happens again? Hopefully not. Okay, so till now we talked about resiliency in a normal human context, right? Well, what about when we talk about pests? So here's, I think, and the rest of my presentation is going to be about that, mostly about resiliency when in the context of pests and pest management, right? So we know that not all emergency situations are disaster. I don't like to use the word disaster. I try not to use it all that much, because in my language, I'm I'm originally from India, so I'm Indian, and in my language, in my culture, we don't really have a word that has the exact meaning of the English word disaster. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this, right? And so I try not to use it, but sometimes you just have to, right? Okay, so many of these situations are, familiar to us. Some, apart from the COVID, I did not include COVID pictures because, that's what we're seeing all the time. But, just examples of some climate-related situations. Wildfires, very familiar, right? It's happening in California, right? Next door to us here in Arizona. There's typhoons, there's tornadoes, floods, all kinds of climate-related situations. But not all disasters are climate-related, correct? So here are some examples of not entirely climate-related disasters. Pest outbreaks, okay? So when we hear that word, typically what comes to mind are climate-related situations, right? Like floods, etc. But what about these here? So you see how these are very, very serious problems that are occurring. The bark beetle outbreak, the locust outbreak, right, in parts of Africa. So the bark beetle outbreak is up in the northwestern part of the US and in that area. Rodent outbreaks, just a few examples here, but you can think of so many, right? Rodent outbreaks sometimes happen, and those are not entirely climate related. There can also be other reasons for that. Here are some other examples of disasters. I think these are, because just the fact that so many pesticides are being used. Just look at the way they are stored. You have different kinds of pesticide products, and they're clearly stored in a kitchen cabinet, right? Here's another, in the bottom left picture, you can see, a number of over-the-counter products that have been used, possibly to control some kind of a pest infestation in a home, right? So, and it clearly did not work because you see so many containers. And then improper use of products. The labeling and the name has been masked, and then there's unidentified products that are used. So these are all actual pictures of actual situations where we go to visit excuse me, in people's homes for different kinds of work, as part of different projects, and we sometimes get these kinds of situations. So we like to share that with to show people that these kinds of disasters do occur. So the white powder there, we don't know what it was, but it was just spread out in that home. in an attempt to control pests. Okay, here are some more situations. Okay, so some of you might be familiar with the picture on the top left, right? It's a bug bomb in use. They are actually quite common in many situations. People use them to control a number of different pests, but not at all recommended. I do not recommend that at all because just because they are so dangerous, they are not really suited for a home environment. And you can see to the right, you can see what happened after use. It's in a different home, but you know the home was blown up. Okay, and here are some more pictures of similar situations. So a mattress, a bedbug infested mattress was doused with gasoline, and someone probably decided to have a smoke, and you can imagine what happened. So that is certainly what we can class as, right, an emergency or a disaster. A few more pictures, and then I promise I'm done with the disturbing pictures. So bites and stings of different kinds. Sometimes people encounter these situations when get multiple bites or stings, and that can lead to a serious reaction. When a lot of pests are present, for example, mosquitoes, a lot of them are present, and there's an outbreak, and that is clearly that kind of a situation that we're talking about. Okay, so I just wanted to share all of these different examples of these emergent situations. Some are climate related, some are not. Some are predictable, some are not. Okay, so resilience is about dealing with all of this, and the thing with resilience is that it means different things to different people, right? It means different, it has different meanings to different communities. In different regions, it's different. And what may be a large, a really serious hazard in one area or a community may not even be a thought in another, right? We all know this. And pest threats especially differ in different regions because pests are living things. They have their own preferences about where to be, right? So all of these challenges, they make the concept of resilience even more difficult to characterize, to define and measure. It's very difficult to measure. So when it's difficult to measure something or understand something, how do you develop a resilience plan, right? So here is the challenge. So we saw that there are non-climate related situations. So when you're planning for pest outbreaks, so you need to plan. It includes planning for these outbreaks in normal weather conditions. And when you're talking about climate related situations, that includes planning for pest outbreaks following disasters like floods or hurricanes, things like that. So the rest for the next few slides, several slides actually, I'll be trying to give suggestions on how you can develop a resilience plan for your community. Okay. So then the first thing I want to mention is IPM. So I hope everyone is familiar with the term IPM or integrated pest management, or my favorite expansion of the acronym is intelligent pest management. And for anyone who's not familiar with IPM and want to learn more about it, please reach out to me. I have my contact information at the end with my phone number and my email. We have lots of resources that can provide help to communities to develop your own IPM plan. And what is IPM plan and what are the benefits and why it makes sense. So, but very quickly, IPM is a science-based, it's a sensible method of managing pests in any situation, not just inside your home or building or outdoors, in any situation. And it uses a variety of different methods depending on the situation. And these are safe, sustainable, and effective tactics. And again, it does not work only for insect pests. It works for any kind of pest, even including weeds, diseases caused by pathogens, and vertebrates. And IPM is always the best option for pest management because it gives us time to prepare and options for control. So just those few thoughts about IPM. You know, I am a very strong advocate for IPM, and I give entire presentations on IPM, how to develop an IPM plan, and things like that. But I just want to incorporate that into this part, developing a resiliency plan. And as we progress, you will see how they're so related and how it makes so much sense to have IPM in your plan. Okay, so having an IPM plan really helps when you're developing your resilience plan, because IPM focuses on exclusion. It focuses on maintenance and sanitation as methods to control pest populations. We always use chemical treatments as the last resort. So the principles of exclusion, you know, keeping pests away in the first place, you know, maintaining our buildings and structures to the extent possible before the emergent situation occurs, that helps to keep pests away anyway, right? Sanitation, cleaning up after, you know, regular activities, that helps to keep pests away. So implementing these strategies can help to keep pests away before, during, and even after a natural disaster. And an IPM plan is dynamic. It's just like a resilience plan. It's dynamic, it keeps changing. And you have to keep evaluating it, what's working, what is not. So it's really, you know, if you look at it as an exciting and an engaging process rather than another item on your to-do list, it really does not affect you all that much. Okay, so let's look at a few different examples of maybe components of developing an IPM plan for climate-related emergencies. Okay, so we know that some extreme weather events are seasonal, okay, in some localities. So being connected with your local, and great examples are hurricanes or tornadoes, etc. So being connected with your local weather information centers and keeping yourself and your community alert, that goes along, right? Seasons play a very important role in preparedness practices. For example, we know that wildfires and floods are occurrences in summers, at least here in Arizona, and maybe even in California, nearby states. Whereas in winter, you have different kinds of weather events, blizzards, cold temperatures, and then same for other seasons also. So having incorporating that into your resilience plan really helps. And the thing to remember is that pests hate extreme weather too, just like us. So in the southeast, for example, in the southeastern part of US, hurricanes and floods lead to a lot of water, right? And pests scramble, they scurry to seek high ground, dry ground, and to escape from flooding. So for us in the West, wildfires are a frequent threat, and so pests seek cooler spots, just like us, to escape the heat. And same in the northern states, when there's snow and freezing temperatures, that drives pests inside to keep warm. So these bits of information are useful in a resilience plan. The next important component is identification, pest identification. So, and this is so similar to an IPM plan. Identifying pests is a very, very important component of an IPM plan. And once you have a calendar of possible extreme events, weather events, and there are pests that occur during those times. So you can develop a calendar, combining the two. And over the next few slides, I just want to give examples of certain pests. How do you deal with them? Ants. for example. So when an emergent situation occurs, ants can move their entire colony. And if you have ever seen a colony of ants move, it's incredible. And it can be pretty alarming, actually. Okay, so sometimes carpenter ants make their home when there's a flooding or those kinds of extreme weather events. Carpenter ants make their home in wet or rotting wood, which is weak. And then that can lead to spreading out through the structure. And they can easily burrow their way through damaged fences, fallen tree branches, etc., other kinds of weakened wood. Fire ants, another kind of ant. So, there's all these different kinds of ants, right? And fire ants are survivors during floods. They certainly seek higher ground to escape water, but if they cannot, find shelter. Okay, I just got a comment in the chat box saying someone is having hearing issues with my voice. Is anyone? Okay, so just wanted to check. Sorry, Melissa, you hearing me? Okay, sorry. All right. So if there is a flood and if there is no shelter or high ground, fire ants will create a floating raft to survive. So, knowing that kind of behavior of the pest is very helpful. And fire ant stings, for anyone who's been stung by fire ants, they're extremely painful, right? They're extremely painful, and some people can develop allergies to them. Some people are very, very sensitive. So monitoring for fire ant activity around your building or landscape and preventing their mounds from developing outside your facility should be a top priority in those areas. And routinely check facility grounds or around your buildings for ant mounds. And if you spot one, for example, this one here is a native fire ant mound, use safe measures like baiting to eliminate a potential encounter. So that in the case of a flood, that can happen in the case of a flood, the floating raft. But in this situation, for example, what we are experiencing now in COVID situation, many staff were not able to come into their facilities to work regularly, right? And there were fewer staff at work, and so less monitoring. But again, and that led to a significant increase in reports of fire ants. So when people did come back, so being aware of that, this is a risk, and taking appropriate measures beforehand can really help. Okay, so another group of pests, cockroaches. And cockroaches are very much attracted to trash and garbage and litter left behind after an emergency event. And this has happened so much during this situation. When people left, schools especially, children just left suddenly, and schools were closed down, buildings were closed down, and trash was not taken out, right? That was it was like a party for cockroaches, different kinds of cockroaches, and they're great. They're great to explore the building and find out all these hidden stashes of food and other debris. So daily sanitization of a building can help to prevent the cockroach populations. So of course, sometimes you cannot, like the COVID situation was not at all expected, but when that sanitation, see how IPM comes into play again. So when sanitization and waste management is part of the IPM plan, it really helps to prevent these kinds of outbreaks. So understanding the cockroach behavior. I'll talk more about cockroaches and cockroach management towards the end of my presentation. But yeah, identifying the pests and taking appropriate steps to prevent them before the disaster happens. That is what I was trying to explain here. Mosquitoes, another very important group of pests that have significant concerns, not just for the nuisance and the bites, but also spreading the diseases. So, and again, mosquitoes are, they're not entirely unexpected in summer, in the summer, especially following summer rains. We can certainly expect mosquito populations to build up. But sometimes when emergencies occur again, we're not able to, go around, identify breeding spots and take preventive action, like, just remove standing water. Here, promptly remove standing water or small puddles around a building, overturn, tip and toss, overturn empty containers, and those kinds of steps, simple steps to prevent mosquito populations from building up. So when those are included in your IPM plan, and they really go into developing, they go into your resilience plan too. So you see how they are related, right? Another group of pests is rodents. And this has been such a significant concern during the COVID situation. I don't know if you have seen videos of changed behaviors in rodents. Rats, many rodents are commensal. They depend on human, not interaction, but human surroundings for survival. They depend on human generated garbage for survival. Some are not, some do not need that. But sometimes when there is no human interaction and no food, they can some rodents get aggressive. Okay. So in some situations, like when there's floods and a lot of water, rodents will certainly seek higher ground. They are great swimmers. Some of them are great swimmers, but they like to seek higher ground, and they're displaced, and they go crazy, and they cause a lot of serious damage. And sometimes they can start fires by chewing on electrical wires. So the danger caused by rodents is clear. We know that. So what do we do before that, right? So again, here again is the importance of IPM. When IPM is incorporated into your, daily or regular pest management strategy, we will clear debris in and around the facility as soon as it is noted. And we'll seal holes and cracks in both interior and exterior walls to keep them out. We will trim, we'll keep the surroundings, the landscape well maintained so that they're not there in the first place, right? So we don't provide them shelter. So I got a question in the chat saying what kind of rodents can carry the COVID-19? So the rodents cannot carry COVID-19. Like as in, you mean by, if you mean how they vector other diseases, then that is not a concern. But just for COVID-19, it's so much is unknown about how the virus can be spread. So that way, it is a risk to have rodents running around, right? But no, directly they do not vector COVID-19. If that was the question, okay? But just the fact that, having to deal with rodents in the midst of a crisis. So incorporating an IPM plan into your pest management strategy, general pest management strategy, can certainly help, right? When the situation arises. And okay, another question about bats came up in the chat box, whether they can carry and spread COVID-19. And no, the answer is no. It's not currently known that they can carry and spread the COVID-19. Okay. All right. So moving on with pests here. There are a number of pests that are considered opportunistic invaders, and flies and rodents are very important groups of pests that are, in this category, and they flourish. They will thrive after an extreme weather event, especially that involving flooding. And that flooding or these kinds of events, they can cause power outages, and the sewer systems can be affected, causing drastic changes in the landscape, and spoiled food and rotting. All of these kinds of material are very attractive to both flies and rodents. So typically, after such situations, you see massive increases in populations. And this drastically increases the frequency of humans coming in contact with these creatures, right? Flies and rodents. And following and subsequently spreading of these diseases. Well, I'm not talking about COVID-19, but other diseases. And here are just a few examples of a picture showing how when flood waters recede, there's a lot of debris that can be accumulated in that. And these are prime breeding sites for mosquitoes. The water contains a lot of organic matter, and it creates a really rich larval habitat for these pests. Okay, so yeah, that was just a brief overview of the different kinds of pests you can expect to encounter right after or during a emergency situation. They're all regular pests that we know about and we have already. So when we have steps in place, we have a protocol in place to deal with them already, right? That is through IPM. When these kinds of situations occur, it makes it very helpful that we have already taken those steps. So the next, I want to talk about, excuse me, protecting yourself when you're working in these kinds of situations. So clearly, after these kinds of outbreaks occur, or these kinds of events occur, you'll find yourself performing a lot of inspections, right? Or services, cleaning services, or treatment operations. So it's very important to wear EPA approved PPE, mosquito repellents, and appropriate PPE. Okay, cannot stress enough the importance. So because sometimes during these situations, they're not available, they're not sufficiently available, right? And we've seen that happening so much in our communities. There was not sufficient products available, masks or gloves and repellent sometimes, toilet paper, right? So it's a good idea to stock up on some beforehand. So always stock up on repellent before a storm or an extreme event. An extra container is always helpful. You can share it with people who you work with, right? Or other members of the community that need it. It's always helpful. Safety first. So during recovery after an extreme event and during the recovery and cleanup efforts, so always keep your safety and the safety of your co-workers and colleagues who you work with in mind, and they are of utmost importance. And as you assess and inspect the damage or the situation, as you repair structures, as you clean up, and always remember that conditions can be potentially hazardous. Sometimes pests are displaced from their habitats, right? Remember the rodents or other kinds of vertebrate pests. Sometimes they're displaced and they may be hiding. So be aware that can occur. They can jump out at you. And inspection is so valuable in these situations, but always be aware that this kind of a danger exists. So when you're working in uncommon situations, Always have extra PPE with you. Sometimes a glove can get torn when you're moving things. Sometimes your mask gets too sweaty or dirty. Sometimes you get things splashed on it. So always have extra PPE with you if possible. And when you're working in structures that are damaged, test for integrity, like, if there is a structure, there are wooden structures that have gotten soggy and wet, test if they'll collapse. Similarly in landscape, things, if the ground can cave in at a particular point. So test for integrity of the structures and the landscape when you're working in that situation. Remember to stay hydrated. Working long hours in high heat and humidity can lead to heat stress. And many of you are aware of this, as I am. You don't realize how much water you lose, and that can lead to serious effects. Right, so be careful when working around debris piles and damaged structures. Like we said, there might be displaced pests that are hiding, and they might jump out at you. Wildlife and animals that are larger vertebrates, not just mice, rats, and other smaller vertebrates, but they are the larger vertebrates might be hiding too, and they're stressed and scared, right? Just like us. And they are present. Do not try to approach them or grab them or trap them. If you have licensed wildlife specialists working with you, let them do that. Then one thing to remember is that during these situations, okay, we can talk about so many plans and protocols to have in place, having extra PPE, having extra repellent. We can talk about all of that. But realistically, during a situation like this, pest management is often the last thing on your mind, right? On a person's mind, the first and foremost thing is to keep your family safe, your community members safe, and people just don't think about pest management. But the fact that pests can worsen the situation so much, that is the problem here. So that here again, that is again when IPM helps. So IPM is actually does not always deal with using chemical pesticides, like I said. So just the basic principles of using cultural, physical, and mechanical methods before chemical methods it's really easy to do. And sanitation and pest habitat reduction, that is those are simple steps that people can implement. And often the hardest part of the IPM plan under normal conditions is getting cooperation from people. And so in a disaster situation, always expect it to be harder. So if we can just stress simple behaviors like bagging food related trash and placing it in sealed bins, and every little step counts when you're thinking about area wide control of a pest, like fly control or rodent control, and inspecting damaged window screens or structures, and sometimes making a temporary sealing a structure just for maybe a few days. That can help to focus your efforts on other more important things, right? So just stressing simple, being aware of that yourself, and also stressing that or communicating that with people who you work with. That itself is helpful. Ensuring that drainage systems are working smoothly. For example, there may be debris in drainage systems, and this is after a flood situation. But even when there are no people around, after, like for example, in this situation, in the COVID, there's very few people available to do maintenance and regular maintenance and cleaning work. So just clearing debris just to ensure that a particular canal system or a drainage system works, even that is helpful. Installing extra, I just mentioned this, installing extra window screening, or maybe a quick fix exclusion method using wood or foam, etc. It is helpful to temporarily stop maybe flies from coming in or other pests from coming in. And it helps you to focus on other more important issues. Also remember that previous control strategies, if they have been placed, for example, traps, and snap traps and other kinds of traps can be displaced during these situations due to movement by the pests or due to like movement of water or wind, they can be displaced. So being aware of that is also helpful. And expect to replace missing devices or add devices, for example, sticky traps or additional snap traps. You might need to replace them, and use any kind of mechanical control tools available in that situation. For example, a jar or a bag trap or mosquito OV traps, containers. You can turn containers into OV traps, any kind of container, and glue boards, anything. Use any kind of material available to deal with the situation as quickly and as effectively as possible. And remember that chemical control only makes up one small part of the IPM plan, and ultimately your resilience plan. And this is for pests, okay? Resilience plans for dealing with pests. And without all of the other parts, which is the physical control and the mechanical control, the plan cannot be completed. Okay, so that's a very, very quick overview. This time is not sufficient to really go deep into, how to develop a resilience plan. But I was just offering points to keep in mind when you're considering developing a resilience plan against pests and pest outbreaks in your community. And so the next part of my presentation, I want to cover a non-climate related situation, okay? And how do you deal with that? And here is a great example of a non-climate related outbreak, a German cockroach infestation. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with German cockroaches, right? You can, they're very, very easy to identify. They're the small, light brown or straw-colored cockroaches, and they're the most problematic indoor cockroach species that create problems in homes and other buildings. Okay, so how do you recognize that you have an outbreak? Signs, right? So signs of the pests, it's important to recognize signs. First of all, they're the cockroaches. There are the cockroaches themselves, right? You can see lots and lots of cockroaches. Frass, you see those little black spots. Those are very great, very helpful and very common signs of German cockroach infestations. So here you can see, pay attention to these signs, like for example, in a building, here you can see, if you look at the door, there's a picture of an open door, and if you look on the side of the door, surface, you can see little black spots. And in the lower right picture, here I'm pointing to it on the screen here, but I don't know if you can see it. But here you can see in the door jamb, there's lots of cockroach frass. Frass is poop. Okay, you see that? So those are signs to recognize. Here in this picture here on the top in the middle, this is under a cabinet shelf. You can see cockroach poop there. And here is a clock. Clearly there's no cockroach poop there, but if you see behind the clock, there's cockroach poop. So to recognize the signs, that is very important when you're dealing with this kind of infestation. And many times people are not aware of that. And that's why it leads to an outbreak. Here are more cockroaches, more dead cockroaches. So when you see this number of dead cockroaches, clearly there is an infestation, right? And more pictures here of cockroach frass. Here you can see all along the door, the inside of the door. Here near an electrical outlet, there's lots of cockroach poop. Here in the kitchen, again, we're still talking about signs on how to identify and recognize that you have an outbreak going on. So when you look, maybe, if you just look at the burner in the kitchen or your oven, you may not see them. But if you lift the burner coil and you look inside the pan, you can see cockroaches, right? And, inside an oven, for example, if there's food remains and debris, you might also find cockroaches. Here's another situation that is very favorable for German cockroaches: leaks, moisture. And this is very common in kitchens, right? And when there's accumulated moisture and warmth, so kitchens do offer warmth also. That is very favorable for cockroaches. So that's a pest favorable condition. And that's important. It's important to recognize those also. Okay, not just the pests themselves, but also conditions that are favorable for them. Sometimes you'll have to open and check kitchen cabinets, inside the kitchen cabinet doors, for cockroach feces or poop here. And the other thing to recognize is symptoms in people. Okay, so I don't know if anyone in the audience has had a cockroach allergy or know someone that has a cockroach allergy. I do. And some of the symptoms are, very similar to other allergies or even flu sometimes. So some people get chronic stuffy nose all the time, and they have infections in the ear and the sinuses, itchy eyes and nose, persistent cough and shortness of breath, which can ring an alarm in the current situation. Wheezing, breathing difficulty, chest tightness. Some people get rashes on their skin when they have a cockroach outbreak in their house. And but not many people realize that it could be due to cockroaches, right? And I often ask this question when I'm presenting on cockroaches and cockroach management. Do you think cockroaches are as bad as bed bugs or not? What do you think? And yes, I got a great comment in the chat saying many of these symptoms are also similar to mold. Great point, an excellent point, and it's so true, right? So many of those symptoms. So see, that's what I'm saying. Sometimes you don't correctly identify, it's not possible to correctly identify the problem. And when you don't identify it correctly, then how can you manage it, right? So great point, thank you. And so the question here, is cockroaches as bad as bed bugs or not? And most often people say no, they're not as bad as bed bugs. Bed bugs are the bigger problem. But if you think of it, more people deal with or live with cockroaches and their associated problems than any other indoor pest. Think of any other indoor pest, bed bugs, ants, rodents, or any of that. Cockroaches are actually the bigger problem, but because they don't bite, they're not blood feeders. People don't really consider them that much of a problem, and they just live with it. But they can actually have dramatic increases in population when the situation are favorable. And this picture is kind of self-explanatory, but I just want to say stopping even one cockroach does a lot. So you see, if there's one pregnant cockroach that's ready to lay eggs in January, by June of the same year, you can have nearly 20,000. So does stopping one cockroach do a lot or not, right? kind of self-explanatory there. So that's how, you know, a German cockroach outbreak looks like. Now, all of these are all of the things we saw, all of the things that we can possibly see in a severe infestation or an outbreak. Okay, sometimes those situations are just so favorable, and you know, just explode. And so, how do you manage? That is important. How do you create a management plan for German cockroaches? And this is again part of your resilience plan for German cockroaches. Okay, so they're really overlapping, and this is how you develop a plan for managing different pests. So yes, thank you. So here, for the rest of the slides, I'll go over a management plan for German cockroaches. Okay, and please use this as a template or you know, a guideline for developing your own management plan. If you need help with that or guidance about other pests, please reach out to me. So know the cockroach species. So German cockroaches are a different animal. They're not like other cockroaches. Okay, they're not like American cockroaches or Oriental, Turkestan. They're not like that. So it's very important to know the biology of the cockroach in management. And so these are just a few the basic steps in German cockroach management. I'll talk about in slightly more detail. Ensure cleanliness and good sanitation. That's really of prime importance, and it really goes a long way. Don't provide food, water, and shelter. That is what we do when we clean and sanitize. Act promptly. Even if you see one cockroach, you know, take some action, and be aware of activity in your surroundings. And use least toxic materials. So this is just a summary of the management plan. Now we'll go into a little bit more detail of some of those methods. So thorough cleaning. When you need intensive cockroach management, thorough cleaning is very important. And wherever possible, sealing cracks or gaps where these creatures can hide. You know how great they are at hiding. A very efficient technique when you're doing intensive cockroach management is using compressed air to flush out cockroaches. You know, not very many people do that. So you just need a pump, you know, a pump where you can spray air into, you know, cockroach hideouts, and you see them pouring out. And before doing that, you need to set a sticky trap perimeter, you know, around that area to trap some of them, or have a vacuum cleaner ready. So you see, that's a great method to bring down large populations. Okay, and baits are a great way to for, you know, and a great tool to have in an intensive cockroach management plan. And there's so many different baits that are available, and you know, placement devices also. Unfortunately, I cannot go into too much detail about that, but I'll be happy to share information if anyone is interested with more information about baits and other control methods. So I just wanted to mention again about baits, because they are really the best way to manage cockroaches. And sprayed products, you know, over-the-counter products are usually less effective, and they cause unnecessary buildup of pesticide product in your environment. And they also interfere with baits. That is the biggest drawback, I think, because baits are designed to be attractive to the pest, right? The bait, they're baiting. So they're designed to be attractive, and if they're left alone and you know, they're applied and left alone, the cockroaches will come and get them, and they take them back to their aggregation, you know, with their group, and they'll share it. So you get a lot more cockroaches. Whereas if you spray, you see how, you know, how fast cockroaches move, right? How many do you think you can get with a spray, right? So just that. And another concept to think of when you're doing intensive cockroach management is thresholds. So a threshold is actually a number. It's an imaginary number that you set in your mind that will trigger some kind of action. And you know, thresholds can vary. you know, in a medical facility, the threshold can vary. It can be different from maybe in a warehouse. So they're not fixed numbers. They can vary depending on the area that you're considering, and you know what species, all of that, and for how much time, all of that. But generally, in the case of German cockroaches, a single adult in a pest vulnerable area, for example, a kitchen, is ground for additional inspection or some kind of follow-up action, right? And when you see, even if you see one cockroach, that means you have to step up and do some additional action. So I got a great question in the chat box. I'll come back to it in a second, okay? I'll come back to it. So what is a spot treatment? This is another thing to have in mind when you're doing intensive cockroach management. A spot treatment can refer to non-chemical methods also. So typically when you hear spot treatment, you think spraying a little spot with an over-the-counter spray, right? But non-chemical methods can be spot treatment also. You're treating only a specific spot, for example, a kitchen pantry. You're applying your treatment, a bait in a kitchen pantry. That is a spot treatment also. So don't always think in terms of sprays or chemical measures when you're talking about spot treatment and you know, cockroach management in general. Buildup of resistance is a very serious problem. Baits are also chemical, you know, they can chemical pesticide formulations, so they can generate resistance in cockroaches. So it's always important to rotate through different bait materials. And if you find that, you know, a bait is not working, don't use it, stop using it and try something else. Okay, that's one thing to remember. Sorry, I'm rushing here. Okay, and so yeah, that's like I said before, similar intensive plans can be built for other pests. And having that plan in place is the first step. So let me quickly go back to the question that I got in the chat. How do you remove the sticky perimeter with all the cockroaches stuck to it? You know, peel it off the floor or whichever surface you have applied it to, and roll it into a ball and then dispose it in the trash. That's the best way to get rid of it. Put it in a bag, enclose it in a bag and tie the bag and dispose it. That would be the best way. Just make sure that the cockroaches stuck on it are not able to escape. That is the point, okay? So yeah, here, got to the end here. So concluding thoughts. So generally resilience is defined as the ability to adapt, right? Quickly or rapidly, that is the key. And communities with greater capacity and access to different resources, human, social, political, economic capital, and other resources, and also knowledge of and awareness of all of these different pests are generally more likely to be resilient in the face of a disaster. And so what we saw a number of, I know it was a lot of information, you know, a lot of different points, but, you know, I hope with some, you know, some of them were helpful for you, you know, when you're trying to think of in these terms, building a resilience plan. And, you know, some challenges, there are, you know, lots of communities are doing this, and, you know, there are so many reported challenges when people are trying to build their resilience plan. And, you know, here are some challenges are developing those goals and engaging the public, you know, accessing data and, you know, connecting with experts. All of these are reported challenges. And true resilience will only be evident after a disaster, but there's a lot that can be done to prepare in advance. And there are two sides of a coin, like we know, resiliency and vulnerability. So it's always important to keep those vulnerable populations in mind. And again, resilience is not an end, it's a dynamic phenomenon, just like IPM. And it's always changing, and it's something that we have to be aware of. And finally, here's my contact information. This is in the media that was shared with you as part of this session. And so please feel free to reach out, email or call in either way if you need more information about anything that I covered in the presentation, or if you need to discuss further about anything, anything related to IPM and pest management, please reach out. So thank you again for having me. I think this was a great opportunity, and I look forward to interacting with you later. Be safe. Please be safe, everyone. That is very important. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, I'm receiving a lot of messages in the chat. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna have to end in order to start the next session.
Thank you.
Good.
I know. Yeah. Sure. Videos are great. Yes, we are actually considering making some with this information. Different ways to share information. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Melissa, shall I stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, actually I'm going to close out of it right now. So if anybody has any questions, they can email you directly. Your information is also on your session page as well as your presentation. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. Stay safe. Bye.